can identify to me the prophet. What is a prophet? Yes, very good. Anybody else? Anybody on their own definitions of prophet? A prophet? Okay, yeah. Yeah, what else? No, I hadn't yet. Okay, so what I wrote down is a prophet is a spokesperson upon God's behalf. God's in tune with this person, giving him the heart and the mind and even dreams of God's own nature. God's doings, plans, love, and wrath for men. These men talk of things like history, present situations, and foretelling of God. Now that we've got the prophet, how about the prophecy? And a hint is a prophet at work. So somebody give me, on their own terms, the meaning of prophecy. I like that, undercurrent. I remember the undercurrent teaching. I like that. And most of this prophecy pertains to Israel and her loyalty or rebelliousness with the Lord and what lies ahead for God's people within these 5 books and 4 major prophets. Now, we're going to eventually brief over Lamentations. So, anybody want to say what laments are? Or laments? I say laments. Okay, yep. Miss Debbie says being sorrowful. Yep. I mean, that's basically it, the expression of sorrow, weeping and grieving. Lots of this sorrow is particularly towards a regret, a cry out of grief, a wailing to acknowledge of the sorrow. That's laments. So when you write that down, you understand where we're going when we go into Lamentations. Now, let's start with some overview. We've clarified some basic stuff, so let's go over some overview with these books. And I encourage you to jot things down. I think your paper has some gaps where you can just kind of take some summaries and jot things down for your own readings, okay? All right, now, Isaiah is writing to God's people in the nations showing sin. And in chapter 1, there's a couple of verses there, and I'm going to read it here for you. The vision of Isaiah, the son of Amos, which he saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem in the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah. Hear, O heavens, and give ear, O earth, for the Lord hath spoken. I have nourished and brought up children, and they have rebelled against me. Now, listen carefully to that, because Isaiah's saying, this is what the Lord's saying, right? This is a prophet. This is what the Lord's saying. So God's talking. Ah, sinful nation, a people laden with iniquity, a seed of evildoers, children that are corrupters. They have forsaken the Lord. They have provoked the Holy One of Israel unto anger, and they have gone away backward. So we're talking about the sin. We're talking about leaving God, right? Now, in verses 25 and on through some there, we're going to brief on judgment. Remember, we talked about sin, judgment, restoration, right? So judgment here, and I will turn my hand upon thee and purely purge away thy dross. So dross is worthlessness, okay? And take away all thy tin. And I will restore thy judges as at the first, and thy counselors as at the beginning. Afterward, thou shalt be called the city of righteousness. The faithful city, Zion, shall be redeemed with judgment, and her converts with righteousness. Isaiah writes about breaking the covenant, the promise. In chapters 1 through 39, you can jot this down. Chapters 1 through 39 talks about God being angry because of man's broken promises, the broken covenant. But to show Israel and other nations about the Messiah at the same time, something's coming. That's what Isaiah talks about. Messiah who is to come and bring salvation and restoration. Now, chapter 9, in a couple of verses here, for unto us a child is born, and I think we know this verse. Unto us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder. And his name shall be called Wonderful, Counselor, the Mighty God, the Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and the peace there shall be no end, upon the throne of David and upon his kingdom, to order it and to establish it with judgment and with justice from henceforth even forever. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will perform this. So we're already getting an idea, right, through Isaiah, and we're going to talk about timing here in a minute. Chapter 53 gives us an insight on the Messiah too. That's to come and bring redemption. Chapters 40 through 66 talk about the restoration plan. God is the only one to have authority over man. He is who we are to look for guidance and obedience. We see the planning of God in flesh to come and restore man, right? All right, so now we're talking roughly, 700 BC, something like that? Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years before Christ even shows up. We're already getting a head start. The prophecies talking of the sin of the world, and we need a rescue plan. And it is God on foot, God in flesh. And that's what Isaiah is big for in this book here, in this prophecy. Now, let's keep moving because we've got plenty. Let's go to the next book. What's the next book? Jeremiah. Jeremiah. Isn't that a song? Can somebody sing that song? No. Isn't that an 80s song? He's slacking. Jeremiah, also known as what? Oh, okay. That wasn't 80s. That was 70s. Okay. What's another name for Jeremiah? No. It's the weeping prophet. Jeremiah, the weeping prophet. And we're going to talk about why. Why is he the weeping prophet? He's a man to desire to see God's response over rebelliousness. Jeremiah writes of judgment being inevitable. It's going to happen. There's no turning back. And this is interesting because, I don't want to get ahead of myself. Jeremiah announces the judgment of Israel that was surely coming. The difference with Jeremiah in comparison to the other prophets is Jeremiah is not urging necessarily as much as the others in repentance and the escape of God's judgment or a postponement. But he's actually more so talking of giving up to the other kingdom that's coming by force to take them. He's saying God's judgment will be fulfilled. There's no turning back. Y'all have rejected God long enough, and God's coming to punish. Period. Chapter 21 in Jeremiah, through some of these scriptures, it says, Then said Jeremiah unto them, Thus shall we say to Zedekiah, Thus saith the Lord God of Israel. God's talking. Behold, I will turn back the weapons of fight against the king of Babylon and against the Chaldeans, which besiege you without the walls. And I will assemble them into the midst of the city, and I myself will fight against you with an outstretched hand and with a strong arm, even in anger and in fury and in great wrath. Though we see judgment and God's wrath on man, God has still once again formed what I like to call a rescue plan. He has not given up on his people, God's people. So we're talking about judgment, but God always puts in place, but I'm going to help you. Yeah, you've turned from me. Yeah, you've rejected me, but I'm going to help you. Chapter 51, for Israel hath not been forsaken, nor Judah of his God, of the Lord of hosts, though their land was filled with sin against the Holy One of Israel. So this is book 2, and it is Jeremiah. Now we're talking 586 or 587 BC, somewhere around there. Y'all remember Sam's timeline? Do you remember Sam's timeline? We did some plugging of some of the prophets in there. So if you kept that paperwork, you can go back and see some of that if you made some good notes. Roughly 120 years later, after Isaiah, something like that. Now let's keep moving. The next book is what? Lamentations. That's the next book. Now, what do you think Lamentations is about? Sorrow. Now, we just gave an overview of the book before, and is it the same writer? Yes, of course it is. Now, what did we talk about? Jeremiah, the judgment coming, right? There's people coming to overpower Israel, coming to take it by force, right? So now what do you think this next book's going to be about? It's going to be about the overtaking of the kingdom, right? And the judgment that has happened. So now we'll talk about it. Jeremiah again here is writing. We have the destruction of Israel. Jeremiah writes of the mourning and the grieving and the sorrow over this destruction. Through the grieving, we see God's anger described throughout Jeremiah, but we also see a light of hope in God. Jeremiah reminds us of God's great love and to place our hope in him. So chapter 3, moving around here, I think in verse 19, remembering mine affliction and my misery, the wormwood and the gall, the bitterness in spirit, right? My soul hath them still in remembrance, and is humbled in me. This I recall to my mind. Therefore have I what? Hope. Therefore have I hope. It is of the Lord's mercy that we are not consumed, because his compassions fail not. They are new every morning. Great is thy faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, saith my soul. Therefore will I hope in him. The Lord is good unto them that wait for him, to the soul that wait for the salvation of the Lord. It is good for a man that he bear the yoke of his youth. He sitteth alone and keepeth silence, because he hath borne it upon him. He put his mouth into the dust. If so be there may be hope. He giveth his cheek to him that smiteth him. He is filled full of reproach. For the Lord will not cast off forever. But though he cause grief, yet will he have compassion according to the multitude of his mercies. Lamentations helps us ask this question. Do we mourn over sin? Are we sorrowful over the sin of the world, or the sin of our community, or the sin of our friends and family? Because Jeremiah actually does. He mourns and grieves over his people. And he longs for people to reach for God. If you don't mourn over the sin of your community, your friends, your family, then why not? That's a good question to ask yourself. Why not? Rebelliousness of God leaves us making decisions without God. This is book 3 of our major prophets. And like I said, it's written about 587 BC, something like that. It was right after Jeremiah, obviously. Because we have Jeremiah talks of the judgment coming. Lamentations talks of the sorrow of the judgment experienced, right? Now, what's the next book? Ezekiel. Ezekiel. In Ezekiel's prophecy, we see Jerusalem had been destroyed, and through the oppression of other kingdoms, God shows and shares of his sovereignty. Okay? God is in control and supreme, is what he pushes in this book. What he pushes during this time. He must be known and acknowledged with man. Ezekiel writes about his coming, personally, his coming into the ministry. Preaching to God's people in exile. We're talking about the people overruled Israel, right? And he's preaching for a long time. I'm not sure on the time frame, but it was majority of his young life. He's preaching in exile for God. All the while, God's people are seen in exile. Ezekiel is led to a right of having faith in God, and God one day restoring all the land and his people. I call that the rescue plan, right? God's intentions through this time of the Babylonians controlling the promised land is to show his might and his power. God's people has sinned so much against God, but God once again will show restoration. Chapter 36, verse 24. Let's see. For I will take you out of the nations. I will gather you from all the countries and bring you back into your own land. Then will I sprinkle clean water upon you, and ye shall be clean. From all your filthiness and from all your idols will I cleanse you. A new heart also will I give you, and a new spirit will I put within you. And I will take away the stony heart out of your flesh, and I will give you a heart of flesh. Ezekiel teaches that while we see exile due to sin, God will one day come and dwell among the people again. Not like he did within the temple, but within the hearts of man. In chapter 10, God's presence leaves the temple. As you do your personal reading, you're going to see that. He chose to reside in the temple for some time and did just that, but God chose to leave, and probably during this time of the most rebellious time of his people. And when he did leave the temple, what happens? You might know the story. The Babylonians came, and they invaded shortly after, didn't they? We today now have fellowship and worship with God anywhere at any time. John 14:23, if a man love me, he'll keep my words, and my Father will love him, and we will come unto him and make our abode with him. Jesus here teaches the relationship with God within us, transforming all our hearts and never leaving man again. So I brought that up to say this. If we neglect the Holy Spirit today, will God back off from us like he did the temple? Just a thought. This is a plan of salvation to come for all the world. God's making decisions for the next step coming. And we're so fallen natured, we don't see it. This is book 4, written about 590 BC, somewhere around there after Isaiah's time. But this is somewhere before, I think before Jeremiah's time. Any questions so far that Todd and Sam and Preacher would like to answer? Okay, none so far. All right, let's go to what's the next book? Daniel. The author writes about God's plan for the future of the world. This takes place again where? In Babylon. It takes place in Babylon. The book of Daniel teaches us God saves. God saves. He will save us all in our world's oppression over because of God's people being oppressed, right? While Daniel shows us terrific, inspiring stories, and we'll get to a couple of those just because it's fun. We see kingdoms rising and ruling God's chosen people and their territory. We have the Persian Empire. What else? Yeah, Greek. Somebody said Greek. I can't hear. You said Greek? I got Persian, Greek, and Rome. Am I missing one? Okay. So the question is this about the book of Daniel. How big is our God? That's the question. Through the rise and fall of kingdoms, God reveals his love for his people. He will one day rule the world again, and we know that. But the book of Daniel is teaching that to us. Here we see God reminding us he's limitless and can do anything for a child who fears him. We see Daniel and his friends. When you read the book of Daniel, you go home and read the book, you're going to see Daniel and his friends being faithful to God, even in the face of evil doings and persecution. This book shows us divine deliverance by God continuously. Written about 536 BC. This is the last of the major prophets. And this is during probably, I think, Sam, you'd agree, this is probably during the most weakest parts. You remember that graph that you showed us? This is probably about the weakest parts, areas of God's people is during the time of Daniel being written. So what are some of the famous great stories that we know of Daniel? And I'm really referring to two, unless you got another one you want to share. Yes, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. What else? Daniel in the lion's den. Do you want to share that? No, I was hoping you would. Well, I didn't write that one down. I just wrote two down. That's why you got to read it. You've got to read it because it's a lot. My favorite one, however, that I wrote down was Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. One of the fondest memories I have is literally, actually, the first time ever hearing this story is Dr. Larry Brown testifying about the story, about someone's situation in their life, and that the promise that God will see them through the fire. And I loved that. I never will forget it. 3 young Jewish men exiled to Babylon, and King Nebuchadnezzar issued what? Talk to me. Wait, what was it? They got to bow down to the idol. And you got these 3 men, and they said what? No, I don't want to do that. But here's what's so unique about this. They were threatened. So King Nebuchadnezzar says, I'm going to put you in it if you don't do it. And they say, well, go ahead, because even if our God doesn't deliver us, we'll still embrace God, right? That's what he said. Verse 24, it says, Then Nebuchadnezzar, the king, was astounded, and rose up in haste, and spake and said unto his counselors, Did not we cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire? And they answered and said unto the king, True, O king. He answered and said, Lo, I see 4 men loose and walking in the midst of the fire, and they have no hurt. And the form of that 4th is like what? The Son of God. He asked them to come out of the fire, and they were untouched from the furnace. And what's cool is you'll read and it says they didn't even have the smell of smoke upon them. They were that untouched. And what happened to the fury of King Nebuchadnezzar in the beginning was he made the furnace so hot. What happened to the men that were told to put those 3 men in the fire? They were burned up with it, right? That's how hot it was. So that's a unique story there, and Daniel, the book of Daniel is filled with it. God is limitless, and God saves. That's what Daniel's a good book to read. Now, someone said Daniel in the lion's den. Anybody want to share that story and give a summary? The representatives of the government didn't like Daniel, did they? His dedication to the Lord, they didn't like that, so they tricked him, right? And got him in trouble with the king, and cast him where? Into the lion's den. I think they left him overnight. Didn't they leave him overnight? And the king came back and asked if he was still there, right? He was there and he was untouched. The lions didn't eat him. So then what did they do? He threw who? The ones that accused him. They threw them in there. Threw the whole families in there. And what did the lions do? Well, finished them off, right? So that's right. So we see consistency in these major prophets of sin, judgment, and restoration. God already having in place, I'm going to take care of you. God's got compassion. And he wants to see us come back to him. God wants to be the only God. And even in rebelliousness, already has developed a rescue plan at the same time. Already has developed. God's long-term plan is revealed that God is coming to bring the ultimate plan of salvation against sin. And who is that? Jesus Christ. These writings and prophecy has come to God's people hundreds and hundreds of years, is what we just said earlier, before God shows up as Jesus Christ. And that's what we take, an overview, that's what we take from these 4 prophets, 5 books. And I encourage you to read in detail of those. All right, now I'm through, so bring the question panel up. And I'll move this out the way.
All right. Well, we got to give it a second. Get unmuted. Is that what you said? Oh, you got that. All right. Now, are we good? We good? Check. All right. Okay. So, thank you, Brother Cullen. Thank you for going through the books. You did a great job there. It's always resources to go to check these books out. If you need any resources like that, we'll point you in the right direction. One that's easy, if you like videos just to watch or listen, is it the Bible Project that we use, or is it the Gospel Coalition? Those are easy resources to explain each book and go through why they're written. One thing to make note of is one reason. Sam, you're back there with his glasses on, dude. Is that what messed you up? He did that on purpose. I think that's an on purpose thing. He did that to sleep halfway and then wake up a little bit. Yeah. You don't wear glasses like that unless you're sleeping, Brother Charles. That's sleeping glasses. So we'll give those out at church. We'll actually collect an offering for if you want glasses like those so you can sleep. And you can sleep during service for a fee. All right. One thing to point out is the major prophets are definitely a commentary is what they are. They're a commentary of why things happened the way they were happening in the historical books. When you get to the historical books, you get the Kings and you get the 1st, 2nd Samuel, 1st, 2nd Kings, Chronicles. The historical books kind of give you the political aspect of what's going on, and you see what's going on politically, but really the undercurrent of why God's letting things happen the way they are is really spelled out in the major prophets and also some in the minor prophets. So just kind of keep that in mind, that if you look at it that way, you're reading a commentary on what's happening in mostly what we see is those major prophets aimed at the southern kingdom. So just give you an idea there. Okay, we'll take any questions about the major prophets, about biblical interpretation, anything that we've been dealing with over the past few weeks, or even coming up in the future. How to read the Bible, what's in the Bible. Any questions from last week that we have to carry over? All right, so it's open up. Yes, sir, Brother Al. So there's one thing that we'll discuss in biblical homiletics right after Easter when we're done with the survey, and that is the Bible has a memory, and that is that you'll see them going back to the older writings. They'll refer back to Moses. They'll refer back to what he said would happen. They'll refer back to the first 5 books. They'll refer back to the Judges, and not only in quotation, but they'll also refer back to it in principle and in covenant promises. And like Brother Cullen was saying, there's always that like issue of judgment, and then there would be that that glimmer of hope would always come through. But they certainly were privy to the writings, to the information, and you'll see that follow through because it's a string pulled right through from the book of Genesis all the way through the prophets. God's promises, he keeps his promises. He said he would judge them if they did A, B, or C. He also said that they would do A, B, and C, that judgment would come, but he would eventually send a redeemer to set all that straight. So the answer to the question is yes, and we look forward to talking more about that and how that's intertwined when we get to dealing with the biblical theology. For instance, just in the New Testament, the book of Matthew, 55 quotations that come from the Old Testament. Fragments, partial, or either full quotations, where Matthew is 55 times quotes, right? So why is Mark is written earlier, but Matthew is put first. Why is that? Because it's a link between the Old Testament and the New Testament. The other canonical Gospels, which are Mark, Luke, and John, they only reference the Old Testament quotation-wise 65 times. So by far, Luke really lays us down with those quotations reaching backwards, pulling everything into the New Testament. So it gives you a little insight that, yes, they did have that information, and they did have that the ability to draw from that for their current situation, kind of like we do. We can draw from what God has said to where we are now and apply it to where we're at on that level. All right, very good question, Brother Al. Thank you. Someone else got a question from a scriptural standpoint, something they want to bring to light or ask on?
Didn't John see a lot of his pictures too from the old prophets and stuff in Revelation?
When you're dealing with the book of Revelation, you're definitely dealing with a book that is New Testament context, but has a lot of Old Testament allegory, draws a lot from the old prophets. And so, yes, the answer is that one person once said to even get a small grip on Revelation, you have to have an understanding of the first 65 books. I mean, a lot of people, it's like they get to be new Christians, they're like, hey, one thing I'd love to do is I want to read Revelation. I'm like, well, since it's a culmination of the first 65, you might want to start somewhere else because you're going to be lost and you're going to come up with some crazy ideas. Very easy because you don't have the foundation to base that on. All right? It's good, Todd. Anybody else got something they want to bring up? Brother Scott, do you want to elaborate a little bit more on maybe Cullen asked the question about who are prophets. Do you want to kind of elaborate a little bit more on who would be these guys were prophets and what their role was to Israel, to Judah, to the people of God, what their role was, and he said these people were especially in tune with God. You want to elaborate?
Yeah, I would say a big thing is they express the emotion of God, because every prophet, if you look at him, goes through the same rejection that God is feeling from his people. So Jeremiah is rejected, thrown in a pit. Isaiah, I believe, is martyred. He suffers. But so they in a sense, God allows them to share that affliction. Like Jesus said of his own disciples, you must take up your cross. So they, not only do they speak for God, but they convey the heart and emotion in the rejection that God is feeling, if that makes sense. So they express what they not just the facts, but the emotion and the poetic. That's why you get so much poetry within the prophets, because that's how you express.
That goes back to Austin's question from last week asking about poetry being throughout Scripture. You'll definitely find the poetic expressions in the major prophets to convey God's feeling and other, let's say, otherworldliness.
Yes.
That's poetry helps us have a sense of a different world, a different realm, a heavenly realm. So
absolutely.
There's something in Isaiah too that most people don't pay attention to, is he was married to a prophetess. That usually gets overlooked. So, Isaiah was, I hate to say they were a power couple when it came to prophecy, but in a way they were. He wasn't just married to just somebody who went and collected water or something. He was married to a lady that was gifted as well. And he mentioned prophecy, and I want to speak on that just for a second, is that what we see, we talk about spiritually discerned, we use this on, was it Wednesday night, a couple Wednesday nights ago, or Sunday morning, I can't remember. We talked about the spiritual things of God. I think it was a couple Wednesday nights ago before we broke up into groups. But the natural man receives not the things of God, for they're spiritually discerned. What was going on oftentimes, if you study history, when you meet like the prophets, especially you have like Elijah and Elisha, some of the times they dealt with were very down times, like economically, famine. There were real problems, easy to see, easy to pick up on. Although the why behind the what would be hidden, you wouldn't understand why. You would just kind of say this is a natural occurrence. We're just having drought. We're having hard years. This has happened before. It happened in Egypt for 7 years back in the book of Genesis. So you would kind of maybe on the surface level say we're just having a hard go at the weather. But the undercurrent is that we know Elijah was used by God to stop it all. And we know that there was this internal conflict politically between King Ahab and his queen and the prophet Elijah. We know that there was this conflict, and they really wanted to hunt him down and kill him because they believed that he was the issue. And you see that culmination between that conflict between the prophet and the political dynasty of the day, and even the religious hierarchy of the day, because it was not the people of God. They were not the religious hierarchy. It was the people of Baal. So you see that conflict really come to the top whenever we see Elijah on the Mount Carmel and the fire coming from heaven and things like that. But so prophecy is that intuition of what is actually going on. I mean, you really see that in Ezekiel when he's like digging through the walls, right? I mean, he's like digging through the walls of the temple and things like that in his dream or his vision, and he's really seeing what's going on the inside. The priests are corrupt. What they're saying to the people is they're corrupt. They're corrupt. Politically, they're being pulled. They're wanting to keep their power, so they're telling everybody Egypt will take care of you. Don't worry about it. Egypt's got your back. They're a superpower. They actually beat Babylon in one of the battles, so they're definitely going to be the person to lean on. And Ezekiel and the prophets would say, you're leaning on a spear. You're putting all your weight on a spear that's going to go through your hand. Don't do it. Jeremiah the whole time is like, don't align yourself politically with what seems to be a superpower, because you might as well go throw in the towel. You're going into captivity with Babylon. It's better off to go ahead and just throw in the towel. And so that's prophecy. That's him seeing the undercurrent of, guys, we're broken spiritually. Y'all are all corrupt. That's just a fact. That's why I got thrown in the pit. I almost died in the pit. That's why I said I want to quit. But still, there's a fire shut up in my bones. He saw things that, I mean, you and I would say, look at the political strategy. This is genius. Egypt's going to pull us out. We'll befriend Egypt. If we get a stronghold with them, we can get fed by them. We can hire the army out. I mean, there's a good strategy. We can keep our kingdom. But Jeremiah's like, nah, dog, we done lost. I mean, it's over. And I'm telling you that we're going to go we're getting 70 years. Actually, Daniel pulls from Jeremiah and understands by reasoning of the books and the numbers that they were to spend 70 years in captivity. So when you talk about prophecy, it's that understanding of the undercurrent of things you don't see. That's why a reading of Revelation or a very book that's laden with prophecy, you don't want to go at it surface level. It's not. You can't just look across your American scope and read countries that are in existence now back into countries that are in existence then. It's very dangerous because the undercurrent is a lot stronger than you think. How many of you ever went to a beach and you were told to watch out for the undertow or the undercurrent? And you think it's a joke, and then you mess around and that joker pulls on you one time. There's something unseen. It looks like, man, it's calm, it's cool, no big deal. I got a little further. You mess with prophecy, it's that undercurrent of God's knowledge, his wisdom, and you can really be pulled deeper than you want to go. All right? Any questions to go with that? Anything you want to say?
Yes.
Go ahead.
So, how does that relate to the New Testament spiritual gift of prophecy?
Okay, so when we look at the gift of prophecy in the New Testament, we look at it as a forthtelling, not a fortune telling. It's a forthtelling. It's already it's an accumulation of what we already know coming from God, an awareness of what's happening in our own time period, and then an applying of that. So yeah, it's a forthtelling. It's like, and we do it when we preach or teach. We're forthtelling. We're saying, this is what God has said. This is the measurement of what God has said. You can look at the time you're in and get a good grasp on. We're just foretelling you what God has already said. It's the vision of God through the Word of God. That's why if you ever get into church and they're prophesying over you, man, better be careful. They're going to put something on you can't get off with Ajax. I'm very cautious of people who think it's a fortune telling, because it's really just an accumulation of forthtelling of what God has said. Some of it's pretty easy. God tells us sometimes 1 + 1 = 2. If you do A, B's going to happen. So it's not that I'm some kind of great prophet, or Todd or Sam or Scott. If they say, if you do that, this will happen, and then it happens, you're like, wow, they knew. But we knew it because it was already written. It wasn't some kind of magic potion. It wasn't a Harry Potter book, Sam. You and your Harry Potter book. It was just us recognizing what God had already said would happen, and warning that God said it would happen. So just maybe that'll help you there. Anybody else got something they want to jump in, say anything, question, answer? Yes, Austin. Let's go, Austin. Bring it home. You, you take. I'd say the New Testament gift of prophecy, foretelling, and this is going to be a shocker. I think it outweighs the Old Testament prophets. I think the church as a whole is better equipped from the indwelling of the Spirit of God, utilizing all the gifts of the Spirit together. I think we're better equipped to say what is going on, what is truth. The main truth we have now is that salvation is through Jesus Christ, which all the prophets and the angels wanted to look into, this great mystery of godliness, that salvation from all these things the prophets talked about is through Christ. So we have something they don't, and that is we have the truth of Jesus Christ revealed, the Son of God. We can point to people how to escape wrath, no matter where they've been or what they've done. So we are definitely more empowered with Christ as the head of the church than just the prophets were in the past. I mean, the main reason being that we now know how people come to salvation, and what is the good news, the good tidings that come across the mountains to every person. Jesus saw it so much so he said, go tell the whole world, go share it, no matter what it takes, no matter what embarrassment or suffering you may have. Go tell it upon the hilltops in every valley, desert, crack crevice of the world, that Christ saves, that Christ reigns. So I would say that the foretelling that we have because of the New Testament and the giving of the Spirit and the knowledge of salvation through Jesus Christ, the gathering of the church, and all the information that we have now, I'd say that we stand in a better position than the prophets of old. Because Isaiah, he just looked across mountain to mountain. We actually see the cross in the past and the salvation, resurrection of Christ. So I'd say that the prophets, like they exist in the Old Testament, no, but I'd say that what we have is something better. We have Jesus, and Hebrews makes that pretty clear, that our anthem is Jesus, our anchor is Jesus. Those who deny Jesus, they have a certain fate. Those who receive Jesus have a certain fate. And then the optics, those who reject Christ have a certain worldview or optical view. And those who receive Christ have a different optical view, which is an optical view of optimism in all occasions, if that makes sense. Did that make sense, Steve? I mean, you could say it's kind of like Passover. I mean, did God shut down Passover? Did he just utilize it at a higher plane, and we are now, we see the Lord's Supper because He is our Passover. So I wouldn't say shut down as much as to a higher plane. I think the people of God went to a higher plane, and we see that in the extension. It's not just ethnicity. It's not just Jewish people or proselytes that obey the law and the festivities and have circumcision. We see that great elevation in the resurrection of Christ is He is the head of all people and nations. And we said it before, is what separates Christianity massively from all other religions of the world, is both of them are ethocentric. So they're usually one dynamic or one grouping of people for the most part that make up the mass majority of that faith. And Christianity is from Africa to America, South America, Asia, Europe, the Middle East. I mean, you have Arabic people that are Christians. You have people from different tribes and nations that we can't even imagine that are Christians. So I'd say that definitely there's a elevation and then an expansion more than a shutting down. The prophets led to us seeing Christ as He is, and now that we see Christ, it makes a massive difference in how we can prophesy to people. Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, right? So we're foretelling that, and if you receive Him, this is going to be your prophetic ending, and if you don't, this is your prophetic ending, and that's a fixed position unless you choose Christ. Your ending is damnation, or your ending is eternal life and joy. I'd say biblically, I would think that would be correct. I mean,
In terms of what we think of Old Testament prophets, yeah, John would have been the last of that.
yeah, I think Jesus kind of lays it out that way too.
Yeah.
He said from
Yeah.
Who was the first one he mentioned? From wherever to now to John, we've had the prophets, and now we have something better. And like I said, y'all are studying the book of Hebrews. You adults that show up on Wednesday night, you're studying the book of Hebrews. And the whole thing, I don't know if Sam started out like this, but the theme of Hebrews, if you want to break it down, is Jesus is better than the angels, the prophets, the washings, the cleansings, the ceremonies, the feasts, the festivals, and all the things that they did, the temple. Jesus is greater. And that's his whole thing, is to help the persecuted Hebrew Christians of the day understand that Jesus is greater than all of that. And so leave all that behind. Don't mess with that, because Jesus is better. He's greater. He's the sufficient sacrifice and the resurrected Lord, the lion, the lamb, the priest, and all those things that go with it. And Sam and the other teachers that will help us out on Wednesday nights will go over those things. These are good questions. And we're going to have more intriguing questions. This is just the surface level. When we hit biblical theology, we're going to have, hopefully you'll take notes and think through what we're going to teach when it hits that time, because we're going to be walking backwards and coming through like a freight train, some of these teachings that are going to be more in depth and pulling from a deeper well, if you will. It's just setting the stage, okay? All right, well, let's stand together and pray, and we'll be going home. And we hope you have a good evening no matter what you're doing. If you're hanging out with your family, eating, sleeping, you might have to get up early. Some of you may decide to cook. Todd's cooking. What are you cooking? You knew that I don't eat spaghetti. That's why you cooked it. That's smart. That's a smart move. You're smart. You know I want to eat spaghetti, so I ain't coming over because there's spaghetti there. I'm having spaghetti. Am I eating spaghetti? I ain't spaghetti. Is it spaghetti Sunday? How many of y'all eat spaghetti? Yeah. Malachi's eating it where? Are you going to Todd's? Mom ain't cooking our house. I can tell you that. She's got papers to write. Some of y'all go watch the Super Bowl. Taylor Swift's playing quarterback tonight. Y'all enjoy that. I know that. Sam is a big, what do they call him? He's leaving. Todd He's a Swiftie. He's a Swiftie. And if you ever want to do anything for Sam, get him a Taylor Swift. I don't even know if you can say a CD anymore. That's way. Whatever. You have a CD player in the car, though. Yeah, you can burn more of them if you want them. Copy them. We'll make sure you got plenty of copies. And if you want to fill his book with any Harry Potter series or anything related to Harry Potter, he would love to have it. If you got any trinkets, we're going to make sure for your birthday, we're going to have, you know how they do when you get a new house? They like come to your house and they fill it up with food. We're going to make sure you got all you need, man. I know we might want to make sure this place is insured well, so and you go to jail. All right. Steve, what is your name on around here? One thing before we leave. Steve, what is your name on around here? What's your name on? Steve said, how did my name get put on any loan for the church when I was in Afghanistan? I said, you weren't in Afghanistan. That's a lie. That was another Steve. Yeah, lies. That's okay. All right. We do know your name is on Highway 70 out there somewhere. All right. We're gonna pray and we're gonna leave. Let's hear it. Austin, can you pray for us? Just do it right there where you're at. Thank you, brother.